All right, welcome back to another live. I'm your host Joseph Lewin, and today I'm joined by Kejal Shah. Cage is a talent consultant and certified career coach, and he works with small to mid-sized companies that struggle to hire and retain talent. In today's conversation, we're going to be talking about the importance that mid-level managers play in maintaining the vision of the culture for the company and how to find and retain the right people. So, Cage, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
No, it's a pleasure, man. I'm excited for this. I've been waiting for it all week.
Love it. Yeah. So, just kicking it off, why is it important to begin with the end in mind when you are hiring new employees?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely critical, especially in our culture and our society today, because you know we talk about turnover, right? In the world of hiring and retention, it's higher than ever in terms of companies losing people, and as well as the cost of hiring being extraordinarily higher than it was even just 50 years ago. So, starting with the end in mind, really, you have to understand what the non-negotiables are of your candidates or the ideal team players that you're looking to hire. Many times when I sit with most of my clients, or if not everyone, I focus on three key pillars that you need to be evaluating in their value system. So it's purpose, passion, and promises. How do all three of those really align with the mission, vision, and long-term goals of the company? And I think a lot of hiring managers aren't properly trained in how to do that and evaluate that in those first interviews. And then that actually leads into problems with retention and development down the road because we didn't ask the right questions at the very beginning of the hiring process. So starting with the end in mind, you have to ask those questions early on when you're qualifying the right talent. That eventually leads to better retention rates, a better understanding of what actually gets that candidate to function and perform highly within a growing organization. And I've seen it a million times, man. Uh, there's so many mid-level leaders and then owners of companies that they don't have these systems in place, and then the owner of a company actually gets extraordinarily upset at their mid-level leaders because they ask them, why are you losing people? I brought these people in, I paid thousands of dollars to hire them, what are you doing? And then there's just this big disconnect that I think it's something that very few companies know how to address. So that's kind of why I do what I do in a sense.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on it, but maybe we could dive a little bit more into um, the cost behind hiring folks, because I mean that's kind of part of the issue, right? If you're the owner of a company and you're spending a bunch of money to find and retain talent or find talent, and then they're just walking out the door after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, 18 months,
It's
and you're
sometimes
just
sooner than
constantly turning
that,
over.
honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I
so
dive into that a little bit more.
oh man. So I mean, statistically speaking, so when I used to work for Indeed, there was numbers that, I was in charge of managing through and seeing, usually for say more of a hourly or blue collar position, the cost of just finding someone in that realm could be anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 per hire. That's, time to source, all the applicant tracking systems that you need, the time that the hiring managers are spending, which is one of the most expensive pieces, which a lot of people forget about, as well as the recruitment marketing strategy and the cost behind all of that. So that's the front end of just blue collar or even hourly employees. And then for white collar, gosh, it could be anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000 per hire just to source and get them into the team and then get them into the training process. A lot of people are wondering, why is it so expensive? Well, again, the talent pool and considering how many jobs are in the marketplace, and this is very contingent upon what's happening in the economy. Right now, we're seeing a little bit more of a downturn in the economy, even though inflation isn't as high as it once was a couple of years ago. You're seeing a lot of people that are in the marketplace and looking for a job, but there's still a lot of employers out there that are looking for great talent. I think that they're very hesitant to pull the trigger on certain hires because they're not sure in an election year what's actually going to happen. So there's so many different dynamics here that you have to think about in terms of the cost of hiring. And then, also too, toward the end of this year, usually when you get closer to the holiday season, people are less and less willing to take a job opportunity, a new job opportunity. So you have to be willing to offer a special value proposition. I teach my clients to think about it as external value proposition, internal value proposition, and this little one over here called your employment value proposition, that really speaks to the candidate and the time and space that you're finding them. So I hope that helps a little bit contextualize like cost and then like the timing of everything, because it really comes down to timing and the expense of hiring the talent.
And then for a company that's decent size, they start either having an internal recruiter at a certain point or working with an outside recruiter. That's pretty typical, especially once you get to more expensive roles.
So you'd be surprised. And so I've walked into companies that have had, 100 to 150 employees, and they had one HR person that was supposedly doing all the hiring, all the benefits, all the, onboarding, all this stuff. And the reality is that having one person designated to do all your hiring and all your HR work, it never works. It never works. And that's, again, another reason why I feel like what I do in helping people, especially establishing not only your long-term hiring goals, but creating processes and systems either for that hiring manager to follow through with and those HR leaders that are part of your team. Companies usually don't have the right infrastructure for properly hiring and developing and retaining that talent. And it's crazy to think about too in this day and age, especially with the cost of hiring being so high. And the scalability of your company. I tell people all the time, a good company doesn't become a great company until great people start believing in it and investing in it. So you don't take the right precautions in hiring the right recruiters and HR leaders and fully stocking that department with enough staff, then you're never going to grow and scale. You just won't. So.
Yeah, and an interesting point on that is, well, for one, this is true in so many different areas of the way companies approach talent. They think in terms of, oh, these are already sunk costs. So then they're not calculating any of the costs of people's time and effort and energy. And then when they are looking to, they're not counting the cost of losing high quality talent because they have an HR person who's too busy and they're not going to take the time of day to really understand that individual candidate. So, if you've got 1,000 applicants and you're just like slamming through and that's one of 4 positions and you're benefits and everything else on the side, you're not really going to take the time to go, hey, are we going to find the right fit? You just got to get somebody in the role and then you're done. And then it's the higher, it's the frontline manager or the mid-level manager. It's their job to retain that talent at that point. But maybe the HR person just didn't have the time to actually go through and vet and make sure that person was a good fit. And that has to be calculated in the cost of hiring an employee, because the cost goes way up if you have somebody who stays with you for 3 months and then they bounce, or the cost of not being able to even attract the right kind of talent. So now your talent pool is all people who aren't actually going to be A players, and they're going to drag the rest of your team down. And so if you're not thinking that way, kind of like you said, begin with the end in mind. Why are we even hiring this person? What are the goals we're looking to achieve? And how much does it cost us if we don't get the right fit? What does it cost us if we hire the wrong person and they stay for a long time? The cost of that is extremely high if you're trying to grow your team. And so it's interesting because when you think like that, then you're able to invest in building out a system that helps you find those people. And it's worth the money to do that, because it's like, okay, building out a system like that, which we'll dive into in a minute, but building out a system like that is going to cost you less, most likely, than one bad hire, especially if you're paying somebody over 100 grand a year. Just the cost of hiring somebody poorly there is, it could cost you 100 grand.
Yeah, and going off of that point, man, and I'm so glad you brought up that component of, how much is it going to cost you in the long term if you don't retain this person? One of the things that I do with all my clients is actually sit down and do a compensation analysis and see how much those hiring managers spend in their time, energy, and efforts to find and even just source talent. And then on top of that, on the back end, how much is it going to cost you to try to replace this person within 6 to 12 months if they were to leave. And if they don't even have a system for that and they don't have the proper job descriptions, most of the time I see in these smaller businesses and growing companies, they don't have an expectation of what the ideal team player is. And they end up going back through this whole cycle, spending tens of thousands of dollars trying to find the right person all over again, when they could have prevented all of that with either hiring better compensation and benefits on the front end and hiring smarter, not harder, and then finding and creating the development processes to make sure that that person is being treated well in their time with the team. So it's so critical now more than ever. And to your point, a lot of companies also don't see the cost. So that's why they just don't think about it. It's not like something that's recurring, like a subscription coming out of your bank account. It's not normalized to that extent. So you have to almost create that sense of urgency and creating the processes all on your own, which a lot of companies don't make the time for.
Yeah, I mean, and just one more thing on cost, and then we'll move on from this topic, is the cost of the opportunity cost of, let's say it takes you 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months to hire somebody in to fill a role, and then they're there for 3 months or 6 months, and then now you're having to go back through and have another several months where you don't have somebody in that key role, and you don't have somebody, then there's the burden on the rest of the team, which is going to make it more likely for other people on the team to turn over. Because you could just go, oh, well, we've got other people on the team who are going to fill their role. Well, if those people are working 10, 15 extra hours a week times 3 or 4 people to fill that person's role, or maybe more, you're going to burn out other people on your team, and your turnover is going to be higher across the board. And those are some of the hidden costs, I think, that if you actually calculate those out, which would be difficult to do, but if you actually did pay attention to that, then the cost of actually making sure that you get this right from the beginning is so much lower.
Yeah. I find that if we look at overall cost projections, right, most people today in our society, if they're working in a salaried position, 2 things happen for those salaried employees. They decide within the first 48 to 72 hours whether or not they want to be long-term in that company. So again, at the very beginning, if you don't have a great employment value proposition, they're going to decide within 2 to 3 days whether or not they're going to be in the company 6 to 12 months from now. So that's one piece of it. And on top of that, if you look at the long-term statistics, most people are actually not staying a job, especially in salaried roles, longer than 12 to 16 months. So you spent all this money, all this time and effort just trying to find the person. You don't have a system in place to keep them. Of course, you can expect them to leave within a year to a year and a half. Like, it's not rocket science. And I think a lot of people, they forget that if you don't have the processes and procedures on the front end, it's catastrophic. It will be more and more catastrophic as time progresses, and especially depending upon the type of industry. We haven't even talked about the industries, because most industries now, especially the most competitive ones, so we talk about logistics and supply chain, we talk about healthcare, we can talk about technology and IT, those 3 in particular that have more specialized skill sets. People are leaving those jobs much quicker than that. Some of them I've even seen people will leave within 6 to 10 months of a salaried position. So we have to flip our thinking to, if we want to keep this person engaged, we need to understand their non-negotiables inside and outside of this company. We need to also evaluate the value they're creating far above and beyond, them generating sales or them generating marketing material or operational. Your employees are your greatest brand ambassadors. And if you don't have systems and processes, then they're not going to speak highly of you out in the real world. I think that's another component that we haven't talked about as a culture.
Yeah. So then what role do those mid-level managers play in maintaining the vision and culture of the company?
I've said this once and I've said it a million times, right? So your vision and your culture lives and dies in your mid-level leadership team. 1000%. Your mid-level leaders they're that middle component of the entire operation to where those owners of the team or owners of the company that are looking down upon their mid-level leaders and trying to hold them accountable for their day-to-day operations, they're getting a lot of pressure coming down from the top, right? And then you also have to think about from the bottom up, the employees that are up underneath these mid-level leaders that are trying to support the day-to-day functions of the business and trying to keep it afloat. If they're not being listened to, then those mid-level leaders are also going to hear from them as well, right? So those mid-level leaders really have to take the accountability on of having systems and processes, and they need the support of their owners of the company in terms of finding, keeping, and developing their people. You can't have a mid-level leadership team that isn't bought into the long-term goals of the organization, nor can you have them in a position where they aren't excited about other people joining the organization, if that helps.
Yeah. So, it sounds like, first of all, the mid-level leaders and managers need to be being developed by the leadership team, and they need to be getting that development. And then they need to have a clear process, and they need to be developed to develop other leaders. And if you're not creating that process, you're not building that in, then to expect them, in a sense, it's a completely unrealistic expectation that you're going to hire somebody into a mid-level manager role and then just be able to magically develop and bring the culture into that team. And I think a lot of leaders are going to go, hey, like, we've talked about this in a meeting, we've put our values on the wall, and in all of our leadership meetings every week, we're talking about our values, but then you're not maintaining. But then if you haven't created that process, it's an unreasonable expectation.
But see, man, that's the thing, is that all of these owners of different companies, whether they be larger or even smaller or mid-sized, whatever size it might be, most of the owners of these companies, they themselves have not learned how to attract, develop, and retain talent. And yet they tout and they push the buttons of those mid-level leaders and say, hey, you're not doing enough to hire people. What are you doing? What are you doing? What's going on in your team? You can't set that expectation if you yourself as the business owner haven't learned how to hire, develop, and retain great talent on your own. Like it's an unrealistic expectation. It's kind of like do as I say, not as I do. And you can't do that in a culture of accountability, especially if you want to grow and scale your business. Those mid-level leaders are going to scratch their head at one point and they're going to be like, wait a minute, you got me through a referral. What's your hiring process? How do you interview? How do you coach people? What are you doing to help me grow? And then it starts this whole chain reaction of those mid-level leaders end up leaving the company, and that owner of a company is stuck there with their hands out saying, I don't know what to do. I don't, my mid-level leaders are now leaving me. I don't have a system behind any of this. So it's such a catastrophe that the one area of growing and scaling your business, the most important in my own personal opinion, is overlooked. Like 9 times out of 10. It really is.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because as the owner of a company or somebody on the leadership team, it's easy for them also to be having this idea and not listening to their mid-level managers and not getting that intel from the employees under the mid-level managers. And what can end up happening is the mid-level manager needs to be able to have permission to empower people on their team to keep them there, and bring ideas to the table, and maybe try some things that are a little bit riskier, but that are going to get the team excited to get behind it and try something new. And if the owner of the company is acting like a small business owner, I've just worked for a lot of small business owners, and there's this mindset that like the business owner is always right about everything, and they're going to tell you and you're going to do it. And if you have that attitude as you grow and you treat your mid-level managers like that, the only mid-level managers you're going to get are going to be people who are just going to do exactly what you say, or try to figure out a way to make you happy, and that's it. And then their goal isn't growing the company. Their goal isn't maintaining talent. Their goal is to make the CEO or the leadership team feel like they're doing what they're told to do. And that's not going to help you grow your business. And it's definitely not going to help you find and retain high caliber talent.
I know you love to read, Van. So have you ever read the book The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni?
I have not.
So there are three key, I guess, character attributes that I always focus on whenever I sit down with a company. Each company is going to be different, so not everyone is going to choose these same three words, but I highly encourage them to think about them. It's humble, hungry, and smart. All three of those are essential to finding great talent, but they couple with the purpose, passion, and promise component of what are the value systems that that person believes in and what they're bringing to the table holistically. So there's a balance here. That mid-level leader and the owner of a company, they have to be humble enough to accept that they don't know everything, whether it be in hiring, whether it be in development, or even in retention. So that's the first thing. They have to be hungry enough to be able to create the systems and processes in order to not only find the right people, but keep them in the long term. And being smart is holding your people accountable. Part of what I use in terms of my processes is spreadsheets and different surveys, market surveys that are sent out to the hiring managers and the employees to get some sense of what's actually happening in the hiring process, so we can take that feedback in and have that humility to say, we may not be doing everything right. Well, what is our hiring process looking like, 30, 60, 90 days down the road? At 90 days, are people dropping off? Are they disengaged? What's actually happening? So there is truly a sense of, there's almost a cycle here that you have to constantly go through this reevaluation every quarter, every year, every 5 years, to really see if your processes around hiring and developing people make sense for the society and the culture that we have in today's market. Not what you think it was 50, 60 years ago when, you could be playing on the other side of the table and saying, why should I hire you? Most employers don't understand that it is still a candidate's market, because candidates understand that the most valuable thing they have in their life is their time, and who they decide to give their time to in terms of a company and that investment. They're spending 75 to 80% of their life in that company. It better be a good investment. So that employer has to get real and have a good understanding of how can we help this person go from good to great, and how can we make sure they do it here and nowhere else.
Yeah, I love that. So let's round this out by talking through, what does a good process look like for hiring and maintaining talent? Like, okay, so we've talked about it's expensive to hire. We talked about how a lot of times you're not paying attention to the costs, or companies aren't paying attention to the total costs. And then, that a lot of the challenge comes from these mid-level marketers and mid-level managers, and the tension between them and the leadership team, and between them and the people that they're managing, and puts the mid-level managers in a really bad spot. So then how do you develop a process for empowering those mid-level managers to actually hire and retain talent?
So, for me, my specific system is called the ADR platform, the Attraction, Development, and Retention platform. So, whenever I sit with a company, the first thing I look at is, what has the history been of retention rates over the past 5 to 10 years of running your team, right? How well are you actually retaining your people? And then also, on the other hand, how much is it actually costing you and your hiring managers just to source, screen, and offer talent? Nothing on the training and development side. That's a whole nother expense. But just to find the right people, and what does retention look like? Those are the two biggest numbers that I pay attention to, because we have to have data to make an informed decision on how to move forward in hiring, development, and retention. Then from there, we create a strong attraction and recruitment marketing strategy that talks all about, how are we sourcing people? Are we putting the right budgets behind Indeed, on LinkedIn, on ZipRecruiter, wherever it might be? How are we creating the right marketing campaigns or email campaigns to get candidates engaged and excited about joining our team before they even start interviewing with our company, and building that brand value proposition. And then the last component of that attraction piece is really looking at, when they first walk in the door of the company, what is that first strong impression that they're actually getting when they sit in their teams, or they go through, the first 2 weeks of their onboarding and training process. So that's really the first step. And then looking at more of the development, it really comes down to what are the mentorship and internship programs that you have, as well as maybe a specific internship that allows people to move up and elevate within the team. A lot of companies actually forget that the cost of hiring interns is usually 25 to 35% cheaper than hiring salaried employees. So that's a component of what we can create, is how do we allow for people, young people, to come into these companies, gain great skill sets, valuable skill sets, support the day-to-day operations of that company so that it's scalable, and then those interns can eventually join that team in the long term. And then having a vision or having an actual organizational chart of what in each specific position in that organization, what is the actual steps or the pathway to success, to higher level leadership opportunities for those team members. Because if you don't lay that out in front of them, whether it be at the very beginning of the interviewing process or within the first 2 to 3 weeks of hiring them, they honestly don't know where their pathway of success is going to be. They don't have an idea of what is the long-term goal, why I'm going to stay in this company. And if you don't create that vision for them, of course, they're not going to stay around and want to be developed. So I'd say those 2 or 3 components in the middle are super important. When it comes to retention, it comes with market surveys that you really have to utilize on an ongoing basis over the first 30, 60, 90 days. It also comes back to how are we coaching and reevaluating our mid-level leaders that are joining the team at that level? How are we coaching them and training them around attraction, development, and retention? And how are we also evaluating the owner's ability to be bought into the team and bought into those mid-level leaders so that they can focus on the number one piece, which is their people, and putting their people first in their hiring efforts, not just that owner of a company saying, this is how you need to do it. I know everything, you know nothing. Like, it takes a sense of humility to say, where am I as the owner of the company messing up? Because it all starts with me. The buck stops with me in terms of retaining talent. So just from a 30,000 foot view, those are usually the 3 key components that I focus on. Some clients, they need more focus on attraction. Some need more focus on development. Some need more focus on retention and leadership strategies. So it really just depends on where the company is at in its growth cycle.
Yeah, and that piece of giving people a path forward so that they really understand how they can grow is important, because A players are always going to they're going to be ambitious, and they're going to want to figure out how they're going to grow in their career. And if they see a path forward within your organization, it's awesome. But if they don't see that, why would they stay? Why would they go, hey, I'm going to just saddle my horse here for 5 years with no growth opportunity? Whereas if I leave in 6 months or a year or 18 months, I'm going to actually get more pay, a better position, and and more future opportunities for growth if I leave. And so if the opportunities outside are better than the opportunities internally, you're going to struggle to maintain really high caliber employees. And I mean, I guess one way that companies get around that is they kind of shackle them by certain incentive structures that don't pay out for a long time and stuff like that. But that can work, and that can be a good thing, but it can also end up backfiring, where you're keeping people stuck, not actually giving them room to grow, but then kind of keeping them forced to stay with you because of, that's not going to really work out for you in the long run.
Well, going off of that point, there's kind of 2 key things that I want to highlight that you said. Some companies will create strategies to try to keep people long term, but they won't actually allow people to get access to certain funds or benefits until way down the line. A lot of companies don't realize that their enrollment rates for 401ks, the reason why, this is a key indicator to see whether or not you have good retention strategy, is your enrollment rates with 401ks and long-term investment strategies within that company. If they're very, very low, that means that employee confidence in the team is very, very low. And so that's a direct correlation that a lot of people tend to forget about. And that's one thing I've had to sit with my clients and say, what are the benefits and incentives that you're offering people? Because if they're not enrolling in any of this, and they don't see a long term with this company, that's just the sad reality of the situation. And then 2, when you look at the managers or you look at the mid-level leaders, a lot of times, a lot of people that are the all-stars, if they know that those mid-level leaders got to where they're at through nepotism, or they got there through a referral, a direct referral, and they came in with 10 years of experience, swooped right in, and they took that position where you had an all-star that was working up to try to get there, you have to keep that in mind. Because if you cut them off at the top and you put a glass ceiling right there when that person coming in from the outside is going to take over, then you're going to lose those all-stars. And those all-stars, I think statistically, the last time I saw high-performing team members, within about a year, if they don't move up within a year to a year and a half, so kind of that 12 to 16 month ratio is pretty accurate across the board. But if they don't move up within a year to a year and a half, they'll usually they'll move up to a different position in a different department and try to maneuver to get better skills in that team, or they'll move out. And people now have understood and realized, and this might be a kicker for you and for everyone else watching, people that move jobs every year and a half to 2.5 years actually make 25 to 35% higher in their annual salary or their compensation structure than someone that stays in the company anywhere from 5 to 10 years. 5 to 10 year people usually only see about an increase of about 5 to 10% on average. So people, especially during COVID, that's the reason why we saw that happening so much, is because people got smart. They got intelligent enough to say, okay, I have amazing skill sets that would be attractive to another company, direct competitors with the company I'm working with. If they're willing to pay me 25 to 35%, and they actually can cast a vision for me to grow and develop within the company and pay me more right off the gate, who wouldn't take that opportunity? Like realistically, like a business owner,
and they should, right? I mean, it's like,
right.
You're not going to prioritize, you shouldn't prioritize a company over your family and your own long-term good unless there's a really, really good reason to do it. And like as an entrepreneur or business owner, you have to stop assuming that other people are going to own your business the way that you do. And I think that for me, me personally, the more and more that I've worked for companies and I've put effort in as if I own the company, it just doesn't end up paying off as the employee to do that, because at the end of the day, you don't own the company. And so if something goes wrong, they're going to let you go, and then all that extra effort that you invested above and beyond as if you own the company, you got no benefit unless you're working for an ESOP or something like that. In that case, you did actually potentially get benefit for that. Or if there's some kind of slipping my mind, I can't think of the word for it, but when you're getting a percentage based on the performance of the company or things like that, like you will actually get paid out for the extra benefit. But if you don't have a benefit like that in place, a savvy employee that's been around, especially if they've had a layoff in the past, they're not going to just say, hey, I'm just going to toe the company line, make less money, have less growth opportunity. Why would they do that? It's against their own best interest to do that.
Well, let's also look at the bigger picture, man. Right now, I've looked at the statistics and the data over the last couple of months. About 800 to 900,000 people on average, I think, depending upon the industry, have lost their jobs just within the last 7 to 8 months. Okay. All of these companies that are doing mass layoffs right now, it's because they're not sure of the economy, right? So the moment, and this just is a constant reoccurring theme, and I just hate this about our society and the environments that candidates find themselves in. Employers are yelling and screaming from the top of their lungs. Why aren't you people loyal? Why aren't you people staying with me? I've invested so much into hiring you and keeping you. Why don't you stay? And yet the moment the boot drops and the economy goes to waste, or we see a small economic downturn, what is the number one thing that every company does? They start laying off their most expensive piece or component of their operations, which is their people. It is the best part of a company, and it's also the hardest part of a company, is hiring and retaining the right talent. But you can't expect people to be loyal to you if every downturn you experience, you're just going to do mass layoffs to save your butt, to save your own self as the owner or the CEO of a company. It it never really works out in your favor. And I've seen a very few CEOs that have done layoffs the right way. I think a lot of companies are doing mass layoffs in a sense of like, how can we get the bare minimum amount of people to work for us? But what ends up happening is a year or two down the road, they end up hiring back like 30 to 45% of the people that they needed. They just needed to cut their budgets in the meantime to either appease their board of directors or to cut their expenses. Like they, if they properly incentivize their sales, marketing, and their operations teams, then they could keep like at least 30 to 25% of their staff, what they would compare to what they would normally lay off.
Yeah, well, we could keep rolling on that topic for a long time, but I do think it's important to be thinking about that. And I think, like you said, through COVID, I think a lot of people have gotten smarter about the opportunities that are out there, and with more companies opening up remote work, now jobs are available that do pay a lot more. So like, we are both in the Cincinnati area, but if we get a remote position working for a company in Silicon Valley or New York City, could make double what a Cincinnati company would normally pay. And those are going to be hard, competitive jobs, but you have to understand that now you're not just competing against local talent, you're competing against potentially global talent, but certainly national talent and national, other national companies that are now open to hiring employees remote. And so then to assume that an employee, just put yourself in their shoes, I think is kind of at the end of the day, is if you were an employee and you had somebody else come in and offer to pay you 30, 40, 50% more than what you're currently making at a higher role, and they're going to say, hey, we're going to help you develop into this role because we see the opportunity there, why would they stay? But if you're not giving raises and you're not giving incentives to help mitigate that, you're asking employees to go against their own best interests, which is, it's just not going to play out. You're not going to retain top talent. You might retain people who you've given a partnership opportunity to or something like that, but everybody else, they're going to get a better opportunity that makes way more sense for them if you don't put some of that stuff in place. But yeah, Kej, thanks so much for jumping on here. This is really fun, interesting conversation. How can people find out more about what you're doing, or if there's a company that's looking to improve their culture and retain employees, where can they find more about what you're up to?
Yeah, so if anyone's interested in, Joseph, seriously, I appreciate you having me on the podcast. Absolutely love what you're doing, man. I support you 1,000%, and I will continue to do so. I hope this isn't the last time we get to do a podcast. But if people want to connect with me, they can actually go to my website directly. It's www.keepwayconsulting.org. They can find a lot of free resources and content that I've put out through the years that might be useful to them either as a candidate or as a company that's trying to grow and scale. You can also find me on Instagram, Kejal Shah, KAGESHAH, or even just shoot me a message. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so connect with me on there. But otherwise, I'm here to support and provide hope for those that are either going through career transition or companies that are really trying to grow and scale. I want to add value to the people that I work with as much as I can. So
awesome. Yeah, well, Kej, thanks again, and look forward to our next conversation.
Same here. Thanks, man. Appreciate you.